Let's open up the vintage collection Remnant Stormtrooper figure from The Mandalorian. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, and thanks for visiting Varykino. Today I'm going to be unboxing, or shall I say uncarding, the vintage collection Remnant Stormtrooper 3.75-inch figure from The Mandalorian. If we compare it to a standard Imperial Stormtrooper figure, there is so much here going on. We've got a lot of different paint and a lot of details, so I'm very keen to get this one out of the packaging and compare. But first, let's take a closer look at the packaging. Of course, I totally understand the mint on card collectors. This vintage collection has that iconic Kenner vintage style packaging, which is really fun, and I am always tempted to buy two if I can. Keep one carded, keep one loose. I wish I could afford to do that with every single figure from the vintage collection line, but unfortunately I am not able to, either with the budget or with space, so I save that for very special items. This one here is going to be an opener. So of course we have some very cool promo photo here of a Remnant Stormtrooper from the Mandalorian series. Very cool. He's holding his blaster, and we can see all of the sort of weathering on the armor there, a great reference point. And then of course we have a red color used behind the nameplate and the figure itself. We can see the figure packaged pretty standard with an E11 blaster accessory down there by the side, and we've got that red Mandalorian series logo there at the top. I like the red for the Stormtrooper. It feels very Imperial. I like that as a color choice there. Turning the card around to the back, we can see some of the other figures from this wave. We can also see that this is VC165 from the range. We've got as other figures from this assortment, the Mandalorian, Cara Dune, Remnant Stormtrooper of course, Clone Trooper, Jawa, Shadow Trooper, Sith Trooper, and Princess Leia Organa Yavin version. There we go. And of course, a lot of copyright and safety warning text there for, because this is more of a collector's piece, this is not for children. We have the Disney and Hasbro logos there as well. So pretty classic for the vintage collection line. This one would look great protected in a case, but this one is going to be opened. So let's get the figure out so we can compare it to the standard version. So now I have the figure out of the packaging so we can take a closer look at the details, and I also have that standard version Imperial Stormtrooper to compare it to as well, because I think that's where we're really going to see a lot of some interesting details when comparing the two side by side, especially with this unique paint job. So of course one of the things that we could see from the backing card here is the color. I feel like it's a lot more yellow on this one under the strong lights. It's a little bit paler. It looks a little bit more yellow in person. And I feel like perhaps this one is a bit more of sort of a beige or a cream color compared to the yellow of this figure. And I also feel, especially when we look at this one, that it's a very even color. We can see the Stormtrooper helmet is all a very even tone with some weathering. This one, we can see it's very yellow on the faceplate, and then it has a completely originally white top. Because of course, if we can tell that the yellow is a painted application over a standard white trooper. And we can see here, the camera will show it, it's very, very minor, the yellow dots over the black sort of lens there for that right eye. Over the left eye, it's just that gloss black. We can just sort of see that painted yellow has gone over the eye, which I think is intentional. It just sort of shows up a little bit there because it is over that element. And so I feel like, especially next to the reference picture, I feel like this figure would have been perhaps a little bit more well executed if it was a little bit more of an all over color. And that is especially evident when we turn it around, which this back section isn't really visible when it's on the backing card, and you can see just how patchy the color tone is. It's perhaps not as bad if you're only looking at it from the front. We have some patches here on the legs that look a little cleaner, and then on the top of the helmet there, I think that is the part that is the most evident. But even turning it around, we can see the front of the arms are yellow and then the back of the arms are not. It's like they kind of designed it to be kept carded, because the back is missing a lot of paint. If we think about these as being very all over weathered, it kind of feels like they have skimped out a little bit here. We've got this patch here, and then we've got a little bit coming through at the back of the helmet, and then we've got this one section here on the back plate, and the rest of it is completely clean. We don't even have much in the way of weathering. The only weathering on the back of this figure is this section here. And I know it's printed because I can just make out the small dots, but there is an element, because the figure is so clean on the back, that it almost looks like black paint from the undersuit has kind of been smudged on the back of the leg. But I can just make out the little printing dots, so I know that that is an applied detail there. But it does look just a little bit out of place because the rest of the figure is so clean. If they had weathered the back with the yellow and the speckled weathering of the front, I think that this figure overall would have looked cooler. Of course, I am very well aware that most of us will display it loose facing forward. That's how I display most of my figures. So I'm not really going to see the back, but it does feel like a little bit of a cheat, perhaps, on Hasbro's part not to give us a fully weathered figure, knowing that a lot of people are not going to look at the back. We still get painted details on the back, so I feel like it should be a bit more of a 360 application there. So in terms of articulation, I'm expecting pretty much the same as a standard Imperial Stormtrooper figure. We've got, you know, reasonable rotation with the helmet. You're not going to get a lot of forward and back because the chin piece always is going to hit the chest piece here. There isn't a sculpted head underneath like a clone trooper figure. Let's see how high up we can go. It almost looks like these are going to hit and stop that from going all the way up, but it does actually fit just underneath, which I do appreciate. This is about as high as my particular figure is going to go, so we won't get a full sort of T-shape there, but that's pretty good articulation in that movement there, and we can get good rotation like that. We've got some movement here at that sort of mid-chest join there. Get side to side. And you can kind of see just how clean the back is. If you turn it to the side, you realize, yeah, it's white at the sides. It's just that front plane that is yellow there. So we can turn the thighs out. From this one, we've got this sort of weathering painted detail that overlaps these two sections, which you can kind of see looks a little slightly misaligned when we sort of turn this thigh outwards. And I'm trying to see, I'm finding, particularly on the Imperial Stormtroopers, that the, I'm going to have to like loosen the joints up. They really don't like putting their legs up. And it's not because I'm hitting anything in particular. It's just, I find the joints very stiff around the top of the legs here. I found that with a few of my figures, and I know I've just got to sort of loosen those up over time, or perhaps with some water. This one is, I don't know what's going on here. This is, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going to snap that. That's definitely going to need a bit of work. That was just pulling back. That's not articulating. I'm going to pull his leg off doing that. Yikes. Is this one going to do it? Golly, that is not, oh, finally. I was a bit worried. This one just, honestly, that one, the pin was just bending backwards. That one I can actually bend. We can see there. But that one, nope. I'm a bit worried that that might have stretched that plastic out a bit. I am not going to do that one again. That's going to need a little bit of work to loosen that joint up if I want to do any interesting poses with that leg. Finding the joints very stiff on these Stormtroopers. As I've been going through opening up a few of the vintage collection. Okay, we've got some good elbows here. Good. And we've got reasonable movement in. I particularly like it when we've got some sort of inner movement because they look cool when they hold their E11 with two hands, as evidenced in that promo shot. So I'm going to try and put a few poses together with that one there. And we've got a nice clean boot sculpt here. I say clean in the fact like the hinge is hidden underneath the bottom of the armor here, which I really quite like the look of. But of course the boots are not yellow, which I think is a little bit of a shame. I think again it would have done well to be sort of a little bit more tied in color wise. I know that, you know, in terms of costuming, the boots are not made out of the same material as the armor. Of course, they're made out of leather or pleather, and this is generally some element of plastic. But I still just feel for the look of this, it would have been nice to have a little bit more weathering there. But we do have those little black sort of speckles there. Perhaps it would have looked cooler to have a little bit more of a heavy weathering on the boots. Perhaps they're not cleaning their boots as much because we've certainly got a lot more dirt up here, but generally speaking, your footwear is one of the first places to get really grubby and marked up. So perhaps a little bit more weathering there would have been nice. We can see that the sort of black ridged sculpting for the undersuit does a pretty good job of hiding the hinges. And I really like the way that the elbows are tight to the body because I really want to get that ear lever in. So we've got sort of pretty standard hand grips here. We've got one with the extended finger for holding on to the trigger of a blaster weapon. And this one is a little bit more of a standard sort of C-shaped grip. So this one has a black E11 blaster with a tiny element of silver paint there. Nothing on the back, but it is a pretty standard accessory there. So I'm going to go and see how well this one is going to hold it. Okay, just a little bit of a wiggle to get the finger into the trigger there. Holds it pretty well. I like the scale of these modern vintage collection weaponry. It's a vast improvement over some of these scaled weapons we have had in the past. I remember that enormous blaster that came with the Power of the Force 2 TIE Fighter pilot. That one was an odd one. Okay, so I'm gonna have to play around with this one a little bit. The elbows are still quite tight. And so if I get him to hold his blaster with two hands, let's see. He's a little bit tight. I'm going to play around with that and I will put some pictures up of a proper pose there because I do like it when the Stormtroopers are holding onto the blaster. We've got good maneuverability with the hands, so we can get some rotation there, get a few different sort of angles there for posing. That looks pretty good. So yeah, overall, it's a pretty standard Imperial Stormtrooper, just with a very interesting weathering overall. I think the more I look at it, the sort of less grumpy I am at this kind of yellowness. At first, it gave me the impression of like if you're eating bright yellow popcorn and then you went and played with your toys and you kind of get like that food coloring kind of smudgy patches over it rather than it being an all over sort of aged sort of armor that's all over. And I think it definitely has that effect when you look at from the back. It's just too stark contrast here. I think if we took like a pale patch like this patch here and did that as an all over, perhaps Hasbro should have just made it in a different color plastic rather than white. It's kind of like they took the standard one off the, production line and just painted over it. There are a few differences between these two. As I've been sort of going over this one, I'm recognizing some detailed differences. So I'm just going to go over them because I think it's interesting. Obviously, the coloring is very, very different, but I'm just looking at a few other details that I was perhaps not expecting to be different. So the first one that I notice of the little buttons on the ab plate here, the bottom one of the row on this one is blue, while the rest of the buttons are black. This one is just full black. They're not there. We don't have any other colors there. So I think that that's different. It's quite interesting. And of course, the other color difference here is we have the blue stripes here on the helmet. This one is black. It's kind of hard to see underneath all of this kind of weathering here, but those tube stripes are black here. And also looking from the side, the thermal detonator on the back of the belt. This one is gray with extra painted details in gray across the back here. This one has a black end cap and no painted details across the back. And one last thing that I think is quite interesting, we have very different sculpting here on the boots, which I was not expecting. I expect a bit of painting difference, but actually full different components here. I've never been the biggest fan of the standard sort of articulation here. I think that ball joint kind of cuts in around the ankles. We're kind of missing the little back of the shoe here, especially when you sort of see it looks like a cutout there. This one, the join is kind of largely hidden under the bottom of that shin armor, but we've still got pretty good articulation. Goes more forward, I think. Well, that one's actually kind of stiff, but this one, I can sort of flex the foot forward. It doesn't really tip back perhaps as far as this one goes. This one can go all the way like that. We can sort of get quite a pointed toe effect, but I'm a bigger fan of this style. I also find that it just stands up very securely as well. Every time I put him down, he just stands up. This one, I feel like I'm kind of doing a little bit of an adjustment with his ankles every time I wanted to get him to stand up. This one just goes down. So I think that that's kind of interesting. And obviously I like, you know, put my figures on clear plastic stands because I'm not trusting them not to fall over. But so for me, it's not so much the articulation around the ankles, because generally I've got my figures standing up straight. So I am just looking at the sculpting details, and having a little bit more of the boot just looks a little bit more accurate to me, rather than having the articulation cutting into the foot sculpt, because that is a feature that I do not utilize. Sometimes it is helpful just to get a little bit of adjustment so they're standing up straight. Other times, you know, sometimes those 5 points of articulation figures do have their advantages. They are very sturdy to stand up, especially if you're not doing wild poses. Sometimes just having a little bit more stability in those lower legs is useful. So there we go. Some positives and some negatives there. I don't mind it so much from the front. I do wish that the black weathering was perhaps a little bit more carried through to the lower legs, and perhaps a little bit more coming around some of the high points and the edges where we would expect to see weathering. I know it's kind of an all-over speckling of that original one, but we can see some attempts made at trying to sort of put it around the edges. I particularly like this shoulder piece here. I think the weathering looks very consistent with the original source material, but then on the back it is just so clean. And then other spots, I feel like it's perhaps a little bit busy. Over here, we've got it sort of recessed in those lines, but then on other elements, there is no accenting on sort of crevices and things. So, could have been better, but the more I look at it, the less bothered I am. I just think it should have been continued more to be consistent on the back there, especially when you compare it with this plain white one. I think if I was making this one, you know, if I was a toy designer, I would simply cast it in a very light beige color plastic and then do the weathering over the top. I think that that would have been better overall. But yeah, if they had added some yellow to the top of the dome, I think that that would have, and perhaps done a little bit more weathering down here, that would finish it off very, very nicely. And I think the back would bother me less. That white dome is just a little bit of a contrast there, which I think is a shame. So I will spend a bit of time doing some poses, and I'll put those stills up there for you now so you can see how it looks fully posed. It always takes me a little bit of time tweaking the accessories, tweaking the poses before I go and put them on a stand and add them to my collection. So I'm probably going to go and do those now and pop in the photos for you can see here. So overall, this was an interesting one to unbox. I knew it was going to have some interesting details to go over, and yeah, it's one of those ones where I think you got to spend a bit of time sort of holding them. So yeah, and the other thing I sort of forgot to point out is the very sort of significant Hasbro sort of copyright stamp. On the modern Stormtroopers, I find it is a little bit more towards the front of the thigh. I kind of wish, because I can kind of see it from the front, I kind of wish it was more on the back of the thigh, like more tucked in here. There's actually a big gap between the text and the back of the thigh. I think they could have moved it in a little bit closer to that back sort of armor seam component there, so that it's not as visible from the front. But a minor detail that is evident on most of the modern Stormtroopers. You can just see it on the inner thigh of this one here as well. But yes, thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I explore all of the details of this Remnant Stormtrooper Vintage Collection 3.75 inch figure. Let me know if this is one that you've added to your collection and what you think about the weathering techniques that they have used for this particular figure. Are you a fan, or are you kind of wishing that they had done a different approach here? I think it was pretty close. I think I like it more now that I have it out of the packaging as well. I think getting it away from the original reference material, I think it stands a little bit better on its own, you know, because we don't have that direct comparison with the original picture. There we go. So Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'll have the unboxing for this figure and more Stormtroopers linked down below. I'm going through a bit of a series, unboxing Stormtrooper toys, Black Series, Vintage Collection, and more. So do subscribe if you are a fan of Stormtroopers and want to follow along. Catch you in the next video, and as always, may the Force be with you. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, check out our other videos, and subscribe for alerts about new uploads. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.